Hello and welcome to today's Fireside Chat. I am Charlene Overend, Head of Partnerships here at Purple. Firstly, some housekeeping. Captions have been enabled. You can turn these on by clicking on the CC button on the Zoom tab. This session is being recorded and will be shared via the Purple Tuesday LinkedIn page shortly after the event. All questions for our guests should be submitted in the Q&A box or in the chat function. And we will try our best to include as many of these questions as part of our discussion today. Finally, just to note and be aware that we will never ask for your bank details, so please do not respond to any requests or click on any links from anyone during the event to chat to do so. So let's get started. Your feedback from the last session that we ran back in May, you told us that you really liked hearing from the lived experience of individuals and with disabilities and hearing from inclusive businesses. So I am really pleased to be able to welcome today to my virtual couch a really stellar lineup. We have Mike Adams, whom many of you will already know, who is our Chief Executive and is the founder of Purple Tuesday. We also have the amazing Victoria Jenkins, founder of Unhidden, which is an adaptive and sustainable fashion brand. Joining us all the way from America this morning in the US, we have Fred Maahs Jr., an internationally renowned accessible travel and tourism consultant and a disability rights advocate. And I'm also extremely pleased to be able to introduce Mark Lapole, lead product manager at eBay, who I am really proud to announce and share that are our Purple Tuesday 2022 Global Headline Partner. So today we're going to explore the reasons why the customer experience for people with disabilities should be a priority for your business. So let me share some statistics. 17% of the population across the world has a disability. That's 1.3 billion people. And their spending power, the disability market, or as we like to coin it, the purple pound or the purple dollar, is valued at $8 trillion worldwide. And in the UK alone, it's 274 billion pounds. So really large market to be ignored. However, only 10% of organizations have a dedicated strategy in place to access this market. And importantly, it also needs to be highlighted, I think, that over 50% of us, and possibly lots more, since this last research was done about 4 years ago, someone within our close network, a family member or a friend, has a disability. So I'm going to ask you, if a member of your family or it was a friend of yours had a poor customer experience with a company just because of their disability, would that then influence where you spend your money? So that's something that needs to be pondered upon. So without further ado, let me introduce Mike, Chief Executive of Purple and the founder of the Purple Tuesday movement. Hello, Mike.
Good afternoon, Charlene.
So Mike, I think it would be useful for the audience joining us here today just to quickly recap from our last chat, the reasons that you went about setting up and creating Purple Tuesday.
No, absolutely. And I also appreciate that anyone who's heard me before probably knows the story. So I will keep it short. But Purple Tuesday is about improving the disabled customer experience 365 days a year. And it is about seeing the individual as a customer first who happens to have a disability. And it's not an individual or not a customer to simply ignore or swerve having to have a conversation with when they are spending their purple pound or purple dollar with you. It does not make business sense. And this originated from my personal experience 5-6 years ago, when in one day I visited 23 out of 27 shops as part of my Christmas shopping. And in 23 out of the 27, I either was totally ignored or the frontline staff only spoke to my non-disabled partner. And I recognised that this was about a fear of doing or saying the wrong thing. So in actual fact, what happened is they swerved the conversation altogether. But the reality was, if you swerve the conversation, then to your point, Charlene, people are not going to be inclined to spend their money with a brand that doesn't recognise them as a consumer. So Purple Tuesday is about enabling businesses to have a better relationship with their existing and potential disabled customers through enhancement in accessibility in its broadest sense. And I say that because in the world that we currently live in, it could be face-to-face or it could be online as well. And for disabled people, to disabled customers, that drives then a quality experience. And just very briefly, in terms of the why, in 2022, we just simply cannot be in a position where 17% of the population, global population, are not felt welcome or treated as treasured customers. It goes against everything in the raison d'etre of organisations who are business to consumer organisations. And I think for disabled people in 2022, accessibility is now just expected as the default position. And that includes the built environment, traditional access, that includes the online environment, and that includes the relationship with people, which is the customer service bit. And for businesses, this really now is an issue, a commercial issue, and a social impact advantage that in the current climate, I would suggest that no business can afford to pass up. And for staff who work in organisations, it's about an affinity to the brand that they work for, and it is about feeling confident, feeling engaged, feeling involved, and having the knowledge to deliver that really good customer service. And finally, in terms of investors, post-COVID and post-lockdowns, there is now a demand on social impact, ESG, which simply cannot be and is not going to be tolerated being a tick box exercise.
Definitely, absolutely. So I know, obviously, Purple Tuesday has been running now since 2018 here in the UK. But Mike, what traction do you think has been made, and what has been the progress being made since it has launched?
Yeah, well, just look at the numbers. So year one, 750 businesses. Last year, 6,000 organisations. Every organisation has to make at least one commitment to improve accessibility. We know, Charlene, that most organisations do more than one. So even I can work out the maths in terms of the potential number of physical changes that have been made to accessibility, either online or built environment, in the last 5 years. So that should make a difference. In the world of social media, you will know that we have trended on Twitter at 5, 4, 3, and 2. And not to put you under any pressure, Charlene, but I'll tell you one way that this is going this year, and it better not have a 6 in front of it. Rather, it better have a number 1.
No pressure.
No pressure. And in terms of impressions, we're talking about 19 million people. And that's a huge kind of introduction. It's a huge audience to better understand the issue. And I think, we started 5 years ago as a pilot in retail. Last year, we had leaders in 15 sectors. I know from a presentation you and I did last night and the slide, we're more than that this year. I think it's brilliant that we have organizations the size of eBay, but we also have micro enterprises. So it's inclusive in terms of every organization can do Purple Tuesday. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of, if you look at the people we're engaging with in the organizations, in year one, it used to be the disability, the diversity and inclusion officer. And now it's senior managers, it's HR, I think it's PR, marketing and brand. And I would say to you, that is probably the most important key engagement in making things happen. It's operations and in procurement, and it's line managers who are responsible for their disabled staff. And now, of course, this year, we are global, which I hope shows and demonstrates the progress we're making.
No, absolutely. And just from your own thoughts though, Mike, what do you think are the outstanding challenges though that are being faced by businesses and indeed faced by people with disabilities around this agenda?
Yeah, well, it's here in the UK Thursday afternoon, so I'm going to use a technical term. Most organisations are doing stuff, and good stuff, by the way, in this area, but I'm not necessarily sure it's fully understood even across their own business. So there's limited sharing going on internally, and the ripple effect of that and the challenge is how that internal kind of knowledge and learning and practice then becomes external and across industries to accelerate knowledge and nous, as I call it. So we find really good pockets of good practice, and then we use Purple Tuesday as the way to amplify that good practice in different parts of it, different industries and different parts of the world. And I think that is becoming a key role of Purple Tuesday. And the outcome, if I can call it in inverted commas, is that you start to see this becoming normalized practice. And I think a challenge for us is to ensure and improve the arguments around both the commercial and social impact knowledge of decision makers and budget holders.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because I think we can talk to the cows come home with people who are on our side, but decisions need to be taken in the organisation, and we need to get to those people and make them understand the unlockers, as I call them. And I think a challenge as we sit here in the global economy we've got, is to see this issue as an investment rather than a cost. And there is a competitive market out here for customers. And I think this is really rich opportunity for businesses to grow their customer markets. I think we increasingly need to get organisations to disability-proof their existing strategic plans, rather than seeing disability as bolt-on extras, which quite frankly never get done. Yeah. And finally, for me, we need to shift the narrative. And this is really important. We need to shift the narrative from businesses thinking they are doing us a favour by getting involved and committing, to them understanding that we and Purple Tuesday are doing them a huge favour. And I think that is a really, really important shift that we need to make. And I've seen this as we go global, falling into the trap that when we have conversations, people are really interested, but go, this is a CSR issue and we have our project for this year. And that really, really has to change.
No, absolutely, definitely. And you know, me and you have had those conversations so many times with different organizations to try and move the dial from disability just being seen as a charitable issue. And that's not what it is, absolutely. Mike, but what, no, and can we share like how we ensure that people with disabilities are involved and that their lived experiences are heard as part of the initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember as if it were yesterday, the first conference I went to, was the first time I ever talked about Purple Tuesday. And there were two questions at the end. There's about 500 people in the conference. And there were two questions at the end, both from disabled people go, we really think this is good, but we are really nervous that this is going to be totally tokenistic. And actually, it's going to drive people to think you only have to do disability one day a year. And that's been etched into my mind, and making sure that Purple Tuesday is about what businesses do 365 days a year, and the involvement of people anchored in lived experience, which is disabled people and our allies, is absolutely non-negotiable in creating an authentic kind of support to businesses, which will accelerate this as fast as we want it to go. And I'm absolutely delighted that this year we've got 15 brilliant disabled customer ambassadors who represent a range of impairments and nationalities. And we'll be speaking to a couple of them in a minute, all who are hugely influential in their own right and bring to the party a level of credibility in the disabled world and the business world that we are going to require as it evolves. And I just want to go back to something. When I was young, there was a kind of saying in the disability movement, which was nothing about us without us. And I think that holds absolutely firm with Purple Tuesday as the narrative. Alongside our allies and working with businesses, we can really drive the customer experience. And I think if it's okay with you, Charlene, this is probably a really good segue into introducing Victoria Jenkins from Unhidden and one of our disabled customer ambassadors. Welcome, Victoria. And just going to ask you, from your personal perspective, what's your own overall experience been as a disabled customer throughout your journey?
Well, I mean, firstly, thank you for having me. Hi, everybody. It's interesting because I acquired mine, like 80% of the community does, in my mid-20s. So I still have, what it used to be like and what it's like now. And it is much easier for me online because my disability is very physical. But even thinking, obviously, I'm going to draw it into fashion. But my experience, if I walk around a store with using my walking stick, for example, I actually usually, somebody will comment on the stick and they'll be very nice and they'll ask if I need any help. But what I've really noticed and struggled with is when I have that stick, how can I pick things up, put them in a basket and walk around with them? And on top of that, getting changed, we have to still stand to queue, to go into changing rooms. And don't get me started on the problems with changing rooms. So the overall experience is it's much easier for me to go online. But, therein lies the disability tax of I have to pay extra for things to get delivered. And then, with the cost of living crisis, obviously I'm now having to sort of revert back to going without my stick. So therefore in a bit more pain, and it's not signaling to anyone. I think as someone with an invisible disability, I tend to find I have a better experience with the stick, but it's harder to actually shop. And then without the stick, I can get things done very quickly, but it costs me a lot more physically. So there's, that kind of that balance of finances versus pain versus energy that is, it's absolutely possible to achieve some, improvements across the board on all of these things. But I've seen one of the questions coming up. The problem is, though, we're never going to keep we can't keep 1 billion people happy. It's absolutely impossible, and you'd be silly to try, but you'd also be silly to not attempt it, because I think there is there are some things that you can do for everyone. You can't get right into the nitty gritty of every single condition. But I think this, like you said earlier, this fear of not wanting to engage shouldn't be a reason to not do it, because I will 100%, we go into a shop and you have a good experience, you go back to that store. And I think, what businesses need to realize now in particular is, not only can you actually afford to exclude us, but if you look at your staff turnover, there is huge data that supports the idea that disabled consumers are more loyal to brands and even to work in head office where they are treated better. So if you see a brand and you see them all the time, constantly rehiring staff, if you actually put the effort into investing in, the disabled community as your staff, then you're going to actually have, overall, you're going to make more money and you actually save. It's this whole thing of cost that people don't want to put this accessibility price tag onto things. It ends up, overall, it actually saves people money.
And do you think your experience was part of the motivation for setting up Unhidden?
It definitely was. I mean, it's one of those, it was a bit embarrassing in that I worked in fashion my whole career, which was not easy when I was sort of sick and undiagnosed, and then had the big stuff happen, and then it became a lot more obvious. But it didn't even occur to me to want to do adaptive design. It didn't occur to me that, this clothing causes me pain. I was like, well, there's no option, so I'll just wear it. And then when I had the idea in 2016, I sort of thought, someone must be doing this actually, and then had a look and they weren't, or they were, but it was very medical, not sustainable, and not generally aimed at younger people. And I just thought, this is really obvious and very simple. I think a lot of people think adaptive design is hard, and it's not. But yeah, absolutely. Sort of then once you realize it, and then, I spent 6 years now researching and developing not just new designs, but also thinking about, how my consumers are going to come to me, what they're going to find. If I do go into a retail space, what's that going to look like? And, it's like you scratch a rock and just see, oh my goodness, there's a whole iceberg under here. And you just, like all of my brand ambassadors, every model that I've worked with, we've sort of gone around London, which is famously not very accessible anyway. And you just see sort of the real difference in the different conditions, and also how we view disability as predominantly as wheelchairs, or it's not a real thing, which is another topic for another day. But yeah, absolutely. It fed into it and just thought, once you sort of, it's one of those, you don't get it until you get it, I think. And then, once that sort of, once you've realized, when I talk about Unhidden and what I'm doing and say it to somebody else in fashion, they sort of go, oh, I didn't realize that would even be a thing. I'm so sorry. I'm like, well, you wouldn't. If you don't see people with disabilities, you're not going to think about us, unfortunately. But, here we are. And I think finally people are waking up to it now.
No, and absolutely. And I was just thinking about people listening today who are inspired by you and what you're doing, and going, right, I want to do something, but I need to understand the challenges. So I'm not going to allow you to talk about changing the changing rooms, because that hobby horse of yours, and nor, by the way, am I going to allow people to say the silver bullet for disabled customers is buy everything online. So just what would you say are the challenges? And then I'll add the final question on, really, is what one bit of advice would you give to people listening today that they can just go away and implement?
Okay, so I think the challenges are, I suppose, knowing where to start, but basically starting. That's one of the challenges. I think people have to sort of get over that fear of getting it wrong. You'll get it wrong. Someone will tell you off. You apologize, you move forward. I don't think fear can hold you back anymore. And it's, it's inviting people in. You can, everyone's on social media, brands, companies, whatever you're selling, whatever service, ask your followers, what do they want to see? What would help them? And start building that into even just to your content. It's as easy as writing alt text, but, also making sure that your physical spaces work and inviting people in. And I think also paying people for this information, because goodness me, the disabled community does an awful lot of free labor. All of this information is out there somewhere. There's advocates everywhere. So start looking and paying these advocates, pay consultants. That's something you can do right away. Just hire an accessibility consultant, have them do an audit, and then you're going to be given a list. And that's not a huge expense, and it will save you a lot of money, and it will have huge, huge impact on everybody. So as a challenge, I think, it is definitely that fear and that language. And I think there is something to be said for learning the right language, because I mean, our language changes over time. There are phrases I used 2 years ago I wouldn't dream of saying now. But you just have to accept, I think, that. So the challenge is starting, but then the difference it makes is huge. And one thing that everyone can do is just ask, what are your access needs? And don't just ask disabled people, ask everybody that, because someone who's going through grief, someone who's got a new baby, parents with prams and so on, these are all factors. These are all your customers too, but these are all situations where they may not have free range of both arms while they're shopping. So there's so many things you can build in that I think people need to just start. And it's really easy. Just ask everyone, what are your access needs at all touch points.
Absolutely. I'm just going to touch on one of the comments that's come through from Kat that simply says, employ us. And actually, there is a huge number of talented people who happen to have a disability who are ready and able and willing to come and work for you. And I always said that the best organisations, and this is from MBA stuff, not from the annals of Mike Adams, that the best organisations reflect in their workforce their consumer base. And so if you are attracting more disabled consumers, it makes utter sense to employ more disabled people. And that surefire is the quickest way of changing the culture and getting the insights. And just a point on that, by the way, it's about employing more disabled people, and it's about doing more with disabled people already employed, because we go back to the point about 80% of disabled people having hidden disabilities. And I can tell you that most organisations will have people already employed in their organisation who haven't disclosed. So immediately there is an opportunity here. But I'm just conscious of time, so thank you ever so much, Victoria. I'm going to hand back to Charlene now to talk to Fred.
Thank you, Mike and Victoria. That was fantastic. And hello, Fred. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning or good afternoon, Charlene. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with everyone. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So, Fred, we know you're a well-traveled individual. So do you mind sharing what you think is the global picture for disabled customers?
Sure. So, I mean, you could break that down in so many ways, right? If we were to speak specifically about, let's talk about accessible travel for a minute. Accessible travel and tourism, something that my firm focuses on. And let's go back to the figures that were shared. $8 trillion. So the disability population globally has a huge amount of disposable income, and most of that for travel and entertainment alone. But they're only spending 43%, statistically 43% of that $8 trillion, because places either are not accessible, or the places that are accessible truly aren't promoting it and communicating that well. And so we need to change that, and for so many reasons. Not only for the customers, but many times when I'm on stage around the world and I'm speaking about this huge untapped market, I'll look at some of the the business leaders in front of me and say, wouldn't you like just 1% of that 8 trillion? And all you have to do is invest a small amount of money, a small amount of time to be accessible. Let's start with your website. Let's start with your employee base. Let's talk about the physical, your physical structure. I couldn't agree more with Victoria. Everything she said, Victoria. I'm going to be, as I said before, I'm going to be in touch with you for a project we're working on. Could really use a stylist. And Mark, God knows I'm a faithful eBay shopper, so thank you for that. But there's this thing that really, I guess, bothers probably anyone with a disability and their family members and caregivers. So we talked about 17% or so of the global population having some type of disability. When you add in family members, caregivers, others that are directly impacted and are attached to that person, suddenly, very quickly, you're at 40% of the global population. 40%. Now think about that as a market, right? And let's talk about accessible travel and tourism. So, I say all the time to DMCs and others when we're talking about events that are not accessible. If they're not accessible, you're losing out on a huge, revenue stream, number one. And not only that, this buzzword that everyone keeps using, sustainability. We want to be a sustainable business. Well, what I try to say to businesses when I'm speaking to them, how can you possibly be sustainable if you exclude the disability population? Statistically, when people reach the age of 55, they're going to experience something, right? It might be, that, geez, it's really hard to get out of bed in the morning, or it's really hard to get up those stairs, or, geez, I can't really remember those things, or something. You start to wear glasses, maybe you need hearing aids, whatever it is. And, even when I'm speaking with resort owners, I'm telling them, look, if you're not accessible, and I mean that broadly, not, I use a wheelchair. I'm not talking about just mobility issues, but if you are not accessible, how can you possibly be a sustainable business? Basically what you're saying is, all right, using the age of 55 as an example, pretty much once you reach the age of 55, frequent customer, you're not welcome back because we're not accessible. And, if you experience some type of issue, physically, mentally, or otherwise, you're not going to be able to use our facility because we're not accessible. So thanks for your business. Maybe we'll see your children. It's just, people have to think differently. People have to open their eyes. Globally, we're living longer. So that number, 1.4 billion, 1.3 billion people participate, that number is going to grow. And by the way, let's put accessibility into the planning stages of when people are talking about building things, and not use it as an afterthought. It costs way too much money, much more money to do it as an afterwards, to make things accessible afterwards. Even websites, let's just put it right out there. Include people with disabilities in the strategic planning, the implementation, the process, the oversight of the projects, and let's, as was said earlier, let's employ people with disabilities. We have to make people with disabilities more visible. And the more visible people with disabilities are in the news, in the media, in advertisements, just everywhere, that's when we normalize people with disabilities, and we're not thought of as the others, or we're not overlooked, as Mike said he was, when he was ignored by 23 of those businesses. That's absurd.
Absolutely. And to your point as well, if we are starting to really acquire our disabilities, the majority of us from the age of 55 onwards, we're working longer as well. And so you're disability proofing your organization for your employee base, for your talent. And so by ignoring, even if we don't take in the consumer side of things, are we going to have to just let go of that talent and bring in new and lose all that, fantastic understanding and knowledge of your business purely because of inaccessibility? So there is a two-sided argument to this, definitely. And and you've touched on a few things already, Fred, but if you were to give advice to an organization to attract more customers with disabilities into that business, how should they go about doing it, looking at both the physical premises, attracting them in through the doors physically, but also digitally?
Sure. First thing, hire someone with a disability in the disability services consulting. Our firm does that. We do audits. We help with strategic planning, et cetera. Many other firms do as well. but you have to include people with disabilities in the process. Number one. Number two, make sure again that they're part of the employee base, and not just entry-level employees. Make sure that people with disabilities are part of the decision makers, are part of the board. They have to have representation from the top down, not from the bottom up. It has to be equal representation across all demographics, including people with disabilities. And as was mentioned earlier, your employee base must represent your consumer base. And as Victoria said, it's true. Statistically, and studies have been done on this, people with disabilities are more loyal to companies that represent that population. If you're excluded, I'm not going to do business with you.
No, definitely. So that's really good advice. And so obviously, Fred, we know that you're based in the US, and Mike has mentioned earlier today, we have now taken Purple Tuesday onto the global stage. And so what would be the one piece of advice for anyone listening today from the States, from you, about getting involved?
Well, number one, here we all are, and we have ambassadors. I'm a Purple ambassador. I'm honored with the opportunity. I know Mark is, Victoria is, and here, people can contact you, Charlene, you, Mike, directly, and get involved. If this doesn't inspire a business to get involved, the things that we're talking about, the numbers that we're talking about, the statistics, if let's talk about those revenues that are being left on the money. Look, there are so many reasons, so many right reasons that businesses should get involved. It just so happens that, and just by coincidence, today is the 42nd anniversary of the day that I had my injury, just before starting my first year of college. Dove off of a boat, broke my neck, and became paralyzed, right? I've used a wheelchair ever since. My point is, business owners, it can happen to you or anyone at any second, and so include people with disabilities into your planning, your strategic planning, your thought process, and I will guarantee you, if you make your businesses accessible, if you have representation of people with disabilities in your employee base, in your advertisements, and right on down the road, you're going to gain loyal customers. I will guarantee you, you're going to see revenues increase, because what we're going to do as loyal customers who have a disability, we're going to spread that news to family, friends, social media, you name it. And it's a pretty powerful force. If 20% plus another 20%, if we add in caregivers and family members, 40% of the population doesn't impress you as a customer, as a loyal customer base, I don't know what will. So for so many reasons, again, businesses have to look. They can't ignore the disability population when they want to be successful and sustainable.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Fred. And I'm now going to hand back to Mike, who can have a conversation and chat with Mark.
That's just brilliant, by the way. And when we finish, Charlene, I'm going to have to go and have a lie down, trying to listen to what Fred said and all the brilliant kind of conversations that are going on in the chat box is what today is all about. But I do want to say that we at Purple Tuesday are absolutely delighted to be working with eBay again as our global headline partner, and some just eye-watering kind of statistics. You have over 185 million active buyers on your site, 19 million sellers worldwide, and 11,000 employees across 32 countries. And we know that organizations like eBay and others can play a huge role in helping us as allies to shift this debate and put disabled customers front and central. So I'm delighted to be talking to Mark today. I'm just going to ask really about driving the accessibility agenda across your business, and how Purple Tuesday might be supporting you in that mission.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Super excited also. So to see where this partnership goes. I know it's been a few years. I actually wasn't part of it right initially, so it's great to be brought on. I'll start by reiterating, and for those who don't know, eBay's primary purpose is to create opportunity for the community, and economic opportunity for all. So it's right there in our purpose. It aligns perfectly with the work that we do internally, and having a partner like Purple along for this ride, and the influence that you guys can bring, in my personal opinion, will go a very long way at a company like ours. So we have a bunch of different product teams working across our .com site, our international sites, our native iOS app, our native Android app, and even a mobile web experience, which is different than those other three I just mentioned. So you can imagine we have a pretty broadly dispersed team. Having partners like Purple and other accessibility consulting companies that participate in audits or share their experiences definitely influences the way that we operate internally. So I wasn't part of this, but I understand, I think even last year, eBay Open is a big seller event primarily for sellers that was held in the UK. Mike was actually a keynote speaker, I believe, and you may even participate on a panel or two. So just having that relationship form and build over time is, I think, going to be very influential. So excited to see where that leads us.
Brilliant. And just talk us a little bit about, so we understand the importance to you as a business, and to be successful in delivery, you have to bring your staff on the accessibility disability journey, and just how you are thinking about and how you are doing that, Mark, would be great.
Yeah, sure. There's a few ways I could probably answer this, but we're very transparent about the work we do. So when we go to conferences or participate in panels like this, or have local meetups or what have you in the industry, we really share how we operate internally. So I'll share a bit of that here. I'll try to give you the summarized version, but we generally operate in 5-ish main areas. Partnerships is one of those, very important. So internally, technically, I'm a product manager, but I have a bit of a design and engineering background. So I kind of try to bridge that gap a lot between design and engineering. One of the comments I think that came up kind of alluded to that. I typed an answer to that. Hopefully the person saw that asked. So partnerships are a big deal, but they're both internal and external. So we consider this a type of external partnership, but internally we have to make sure we're working with the right groups. And of course, that's probably kind of obvious. The people that are creating product, the PMs that are defining requirements, the designers that are designing the interfaces, the engineers that are coding things up, the people that are testing things, that they're testing things with keyboard only use or assistive technology. But it goes beyond the product teams too. How do we partner with legal? How do we partner with marketing? How do we partner with advertising? A theme that I've heard here a lot, how do we partner with our customer support folks? They're the ones handling the inbound complaints or challenges that our people or eBayers, eBay members are facing with the site or our apps. Onboarding is a big one, new hires. What happens when you have new hires? What better way to get in front of people than to let them know the multitude of things that you have to learn when you're joining a new company, but especially a company like ours. We want to make sure we're part of that conversation. So we attend panels like this for new hires, recent college grads up to senior level folks. So getting that message out there is important. So that's partnerships is one. Another big one is education and awareness. We hold trainings throughout the year for primarily the product teams, yes, because that's where at least for us, we talk about accessibility. We really mean digital accessibility. So we don't work in the physical space. I see there's some comments there. We recognize that's a space, but that's just not where we spend our time. We have role-specific training. So if it's very design-focused and what that means for designing for accessibility, developing for accessibility and testing, we have team-specific trainings. If we have Our search team at eBay is a big team, you could probably imagine. So we really want to ensure that that search experience is very accessible. That's the primary reason people come to eBay, to find the thing they want or the gift they want to purchase, perhaps. Not to exclude selling, of course, because there's a whole group of people that, of course, have to be able to sell, and that's part of the creating economic opportunity for all. So other internal events, being on stage with our CTO, demonstrating that, hey, this is something we do as a company. Some people may not be aware of, but you're on stage with a VP who's talking about broader strategy for the year, perhaps, or maybe this quarter's accomplishments or what have you, but being included in that conversation. Sending out regular communications, email about program updates and tracking our progress and things like that are some things we do. So that's education and awareness. Tooling and resources. We want to make sure that product teams have tooling available. So having a good foundation to start from is super important. So we have these things called eBay Mind Patterns. So like MIND, it's an acronym for something. We have a ton of acronyms at eBay, like a lot of companies, but it's open sourced. So you can search for this on your favorite search engine. That's eBay Mind Patterns. That at least level sets everyone from what we expect structurally for these common website components that you encounter as a user of any website. And they have accessibility baked into those. But how do we build automated testing tools so that teams aren't always struggling with learning new tools? Manual testing guidance so that they understand that accessibility isn't just about some automated checkpoint or automated testing tool is going to magically solve. Setting up a remote testing environment. A lot of our developers work on Macs, but we recognize a lot of our eBay users use Windows, and they may be using different assistive technology or different browser AT combos. So setting up an environment for our employees to actually test upon. Process and workflow, there's a lot of things that can be improved here, but we constantly ask ourselves, where can we inject accessibility across the product development lifecycle? Early on in the days, 10 plus years ago, when we started things, we really focused on the coding and testing part. Well, that's a little too much, too late, maybe too far downstream. So where can we build things into design early on? And then monitoring and reporting. So we're doing all this great work. We're talking to the teams, we're training them up. We have tools available, but how do we know how well we're doing with what we're putting in front of our eBay users? So we have regular audits run. Purple helped us with an audit a while back, but we engage with other vendors to help with this auditing of our most trafficked, most visited screens. And then we go back and work with the product teams and go through the process and get those issues addressed. We want to make sure there's very little severe issues that end up on the site. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. We want to make sure we provide the most usable experience so the most people can contribute and participate in the eBay ecosystem. So those are like the 5-ish main areas: partnerships, education, awareness, tooling and resources, process, workflow related work, monitoring and reporting. And I guess the last one, I guess I could throw in is customer support, but I mentioned that earlier. So.
No, I think you make the point that goes back to some of the comments about understanding the principles of universal design and building in disability inclusion from the outset, so you don't have to retrofit later on in the process, which is always a kind of second best kind of solution. So no, really, really useful. Mark, just kind of finally, you've seen how dynamic the kind of conversation is today, and the power of Purple Tuesday in really driving transformation in the customer experience. There'll be business leaders listening in today, either live or on demand. And what would be your one piece of advice to them on this agenda?
Yeah, one piece is tough for someone like me to narrow it down. I might say two. One piece is not really very specific, but just start.
Yeah.
I find a lot of companies, and maybe there's an authentic passion internally by a few people at a given company who want to do the right thing and know that they're missing something somewhere. But just start somewhere. So, it doesn't have to be some extravagant plan or strategy from the get-go, all those things I mentioned took us years to get to. Don't expect to do all of that stuff at once. Do one thing. Do one thing for, I don't know, a few quarters. Get the message out there. But the second thing I would say is, if you can, have some invited speakers. Hearing from people outside of your organization or your small group, small, medium, or large business, doesn't matter, it seems. We have events internally too. We have invited speakers and guest speakers come and talk about their experiences. It doesn't even always have to be about the company. We invite people in who maybe talk about eBay for 2 minutes, but they spend 30 minutes talking about their morning routines, how they get up, how they check their mail, how they get their coffee, how they get to the bus, or how they get to their job, or whatever it is they do day to day. It's just hearing about people sharing their stories and storytelling. Because then what we've found anyway is that a good story resonates with anybody. I mean, we all like movies generally. And so when our designers and developers can sense that or put themselves in someone else's shoes potentially for even a short period of time, it really sits with them a while when they go back to their day-to-day job. So they take it with them. So I'd say those two things, maybe start somewhere and get some people to come in and share their experiences.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. And I'm going to hand back to Charlene.
Yes, so I'm going to try now and open up to a Q&A. So please forgive me because there has been so many messages come in. I'm going to try and wade through and at least get a few of them answered. Okay, so we've got one here that says, so we're looking to improve our website accessibility and provide information to customers in advance of their visit. So, but they want to know, as consumers, where would you expect to find the information on accessibility on that website before your visit? Should it be in a section headed accessibility, or should it be inclusivity? They're just looking for a little bit of advice, you know, what is appropriate, and I suppose anyone can take this question.
So if I may, first of all, let's make sure that the website itself is accessible to people with disabilities, right? So that people who are blind or low vision or may have some reaction to a specific color or font, etc. Let's make sure that the website itself is accessible, and there are plenty of web designers out there and who can help with this. Number two is once your site becomes accessible, there is a moniker that goes on the front page of a website, which people with disabilities can use that moniker to click on and to access the accessibility of the website. So it's and then sometimes you will find, as I do when I'm looking at hotels or other places, if I'm looking specifically for, let's say, accessible rooms at a hotel, there usually is a separate, special, section, click on, drop down, part of the website that will talk specifically about the accessibility of a business environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other points from anyone else? Or I think Fred pretty much covered a lot of that himself. Fantastic. So this one's to you, Mike. So we were talking about earlier on around the numbers increasing in participation of Purple Tuesday. So this question is specifically, so how have the numbers picked up in the hospitality sector, specifically across the last 5 years? And the question here is, has this been just in the UK and Europe or other parts of the world? So I know we've spoke on this, but it's just to reiterate some of the points already raised.
Yeah, and I think the answer is yes. And I think what we know, and everyone will understand, that hospitality was disproportionately kind of affected by lockdown. And so really, in the last couple of years, we haven't really had many organisations from the hospitality sector being involved for understandable reasons. Mm-hmm. I'm absolutely delighted, because we've announced it, that Whitbread are our hospitality Purple Tuesday sector partner this year. We were on a call with them yesterday. I mean, we're hugely excited about their plans, and being able to really demonstrate their commitment to making accessible changes. And I'm pretty sure that others will follow, and others will follow. We know, Charlene, in other countries in which Purple Tuesday is launching this year.
Absolutely, and we are already starting to see registrations coming in from the US, coming in from the UAE, Pakistan, Malaysia. So we are really starting to see Purple Tuesday ignite some interest in new markets outside of the UK, which is absolutely amazing. Another question. So our organization has started an accessibility and inclusion team, hiring a product manager, designers, and engineers focused on making applications accessible. But it's a completely new stream of work, essentially, for this organization. Now, I know, Mark, you've already touched on this, but is there a simple way of, what steps, recommended steps, would you advise in educating all staff, not just the ones in the accessibility team, but all staff around the importance of making things accessible?
Yeah, education is an important part of that. The first thing I'd say, if it's a new team, somewhere along the road, that group received approval to get formed. So I'd say make sure you latch on to that executive sponsor. So if you have a leadership that sponsors that type of work within your organization, generally it's a lot more, it's a lot easier to get funding that you may need or budget you might need for subsequent training. So absolutely train up the core team. They may already be, if they're already focused on accessibility work, but some ways that we did that initially is we looked at we'll say I don't know how to answer this, the areas of the site and experience where we thought we could have the most impact. Another way of saying that is the areas that we knew very quickly had the most issues. So we worked with those teams directly, and we had a little bit more of a targeted training session for them. It might feel a bit, a bit slow in the beginning, and you might feel like you're doing a lot of repetitive work, but it built up over time, and those teams took back those learnings, spread the word with their other teammates. And then we just happened to do that with pockets of teams throughout the company early on, and word spread, and we still had that support. We still had our executive sponsor, and then it just grew into more, larger company-wide type trainings in the future. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, speaking to even organizations like ourselves and Fred and others that, bring the experts from the outside in to provide that training and to learn from the experts of what is expected. And there has to be a level, just a basic disability awareness right across the business from the top down, not just as we said in this accessibility team, to understand the business benefits and the reasons why accessibility is important. And I think that is a huge point. There's so many questions, we're just not going to get through them, and I know we've got 2 minutes to go. Mike, so in your quickest way possible, do you want to summarize what we spoke about today?
No. Yeah, very quickly. The one thing that absolutely leapt out on me is something that Fred said, is that in terms of the purple dollar, the purple pound, that what we know is that only 43% is currently being spent. Mm-hmm. And even my maths works out that leaves 57% that is potentially available on top of that 43. So there is a huge commercial reason why businesses should be involved alongside the kind of social reasons. And Purple Tuesday is about the disabled customer, but clearly there is a symbiotic relationship here with the organisation and disabled employees as well. So there's a huge read across. And in many ways for organisations, this is your approach to disability inclusion, for which Purple Tuesday and the customer is part of. And when you think disability inclusion, think built environment, think online environment, and think people. And I will finish with something that's come up time and time again today in terms of the one piece of advice to everyone is start.
Absolutely. Wow, what a great discussion, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. There is a few call to actions before I finish. So one, if you have not already signed up to Purple Tuesday, the global movement, either as a business, an individual, or a not-for-profit, get involved. Just go to purpletuesday.co and register and get involved. Secondly, if you're not already following Purple Tuesday on LinkedIn, then do it now. Click there, follow us. We will be sharing this recording from this session on that platform shortly after today. And we will also be releasing some fantastic free resources for organizations just to get started on their journey over the incoming weeks as we lead up to Purple Tuesday. And if you are interested in joining people like eBay and Whitbread as part of our Purple Tuesday Partners Group, then contact me. Or indeed, if you just want to speak about and talk about your own disability inclusion journey and the steps that you want to take going forward, then you can email us directly at hello@purpletuesday.co. And finally, we are hosting a Purple Tuesday Global Virtual Conference, the first ever global conference for Purple Tuesday on the 11th of October. And we will be running a series of different panel events, discussions like this one today on 5 different topics around disability and accessibility. So please do join us on that day. It's absolutely free to attend. The details, I think, are going to be shared as a link now in the chat function for you to go directly and to reserve your place. But without further ado, I just want to say thank you all again for your contributions. Thank you to our guest panelists, Fred, Victoria, and Mark and Mike. And until the next time, goodbye.